and today is the second session in the two-part workshop series that's designed with the intention of helping you to create the strongest presentations that you can for the end of this course, as well as to build some skills that you'll take with you once you leave the hallowed halls of Baruch and into your future careers. So last time we spent quite a bit of time talking about central messages. We discussed what makes for a strong central message, the different parts that a strong central message contains, and we practiced drafting some of those. Today, we're going to focus on the actual presentation aspect of giving this presentation. We will come back to the central messages again. You'll have a little bit of practice once more drafting a central message as you work in teams. But today's focus is to describe the features of effective embodied speaking, specifically in a team, practice specific strategies for the online learning context, and also to practice making evidence-based recommendations from within an ethical framework. So before we really jump into things, I just want to take a moment to see if anybody has any questions from last time or about this time before we get into it. Okay, well, if there isn't anything, then let's just go ahead and get started. If a question comes up, feel free to either raise your hand or throw it in the chat bar, and I will try to get to it. So obviously, some aspects about delivering your presentation are going to be different than they normally would be because you'll be doing your presentation online in some fashion. And giving a presentation online is a little bit different from giving a face-to-face presentation. However, it is going to be helpful to us to start with the familiar face-to-face context when we think about what makes for an effective presentation, and then we can think about what changes for an online presentation. So we're going to start by watching a YouTube video that I have for you. I'm going to go ahead and put the link down in the chat bar. So go ahead and just click on that yourselves. It's about 3 minutes long, so I'm going to give you about 3.5, 4 minutes for everybody to watch and load that video. While you're watching this video, what I would like for you to do is think about what are the things that she does that makes her presentation particularly effective. So what kinds of rhetorical moves or what kinds of ways that she uses her body make for a good presentation. So go ahead and take about 3 minutes to watch that video, and then we will all come back together to discuss it. Okay, I think everybody should be through with the video now. So I would like us to just discuss what about Samaya's presentation, what kinds of things she did that you thought were particularly effective. And you can just go ahead and shout things out because I can't see all your little faces while while I'm screen sharing up here.
Body language.
Okay, what about her body language?
She explained her point was gesticulation of her hands, and her pronunciation was clean. She was like waited before telling important things, like she paused a little bit.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. She used gestures for emphasis. She used gestures for emphasis. She also used pauses in her speech for emphasis as well. And you said that she spoke clearly.
Yep.
Did I get everything?
Yes.
Okay, great. What else did you think was effective about her speech?
I think it was effective in the beginning that she started off, like saying, if time's not just important if you're like a bus driver, like I feel like right off the bat, it kind of got you hooked by her leading with like a little bit of a joke.
Yeah, absolutely. She started with a catchy beginning, but her beginning was more than just catchy. What else did her first couple moments of her presentation contain?
Maybe relatable.
Okay, it was definitely relatable. What was relatable about her presentation? Like, how did she make it relatable?
So I noticed that the audience members were like fairly young, so they perhaps understood or like they knew some of the films that she was talking about. So yeah.
Okay, so she was relatable with the kinds of examples that she chose.
Yeah.
This was, as you probably saw on the video, this was 2012. So these were certainly fairly big, well-known movies at the time. They may not be as relatable right now, but at the time they were very relatable examples. Going back to the beginning of her presentation, she started with a little bit of a catchy situation, right? She talked about waiting for a Sydney bus driver, but there's something else that she included in the first 20-ish seconds of her presentation that helped to really ground the presentation as a whole. What was the thing that she included? And I'll give you a little hint. It's something that we've talked a lot about.
She kind of made a debatable claim saying that like by releasing a movie, it could also take away sales from an existing product if they release it too late.
Yeah, absolutely. She told us exactly what her central message was. And remember, there are three parts to a central message. It contains a debatable claim, which is what you just identified. That's the thing that she's arguing for in her presentation. It also contains evidence to support that debatable claim, and it overviews the presentation as a whole. So within the first 15, 20-ish seconds, I haven't timed it out exactly, but I know it's very, very early on. We know exactly what to expect from her presentation, right? We know what it is that she's arguing for, and it gets our interest. And because we know what it is that she's arguing, we want to know how she's going to defend this claim that she's making. So she starts with a catchy beginning, but it also has a central message there to really get us invested. Okay, what else does she do really well in her presentation?
The PowerPoint, probably a visual.
Okay. What did you find that was particularly good about the PowerPoint, or what did you think was good about the PowerPoint?
So I would say it's simple. It's not flooded with words or graphs. And she was able to explain. She was able to use the visual properly to kind of explain her main idea, I guess.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So this is a very, very short presentation. It's only 3 minutes. That's what the competition is. So she had just one slide, but that slide helped to support and provide specific evidence for her debatable claim. That was the thesis that she was arguing for. So she had a lot of information contained on that slide. I know you didn't get a super good look at it because of the way this was filmed, but she had a lot of information contained on that slide, but at the same time, it wasn't too busy or too distracting such that it took away from what she was saying. Instead, it helped to provide the data that she was referring to so that her audience had that point of reference, and it helped strengthen and support her speech overall. Anything else that anyone wants to add in here? Or do we feel like we pretty much covered it for right now? All right, I think we have a pretty good list going. So we know kind of the things that make for a really good in-person presentation like Samaya's, but your presentations obviously are going to be a bit different, right? In two particularly important contexts. One is that you're going to be working in a group, and two is that you're going to be doing them online in some fashion. So speaking of doing it online, can somebody share with me how it is that you're going to be giving your presentations for this class? Will you be doing them live over Zoom, kind of like this presentation right now? Are they going to be pre-recorded? If they're pre-recorded, is there video or is it just voiceover? Tell me a little bit about your presentation.
I believe for my group, we're doing it live. We haven't really discussed it that much yet.
Okay. Are you given a choice of how you do it?
I believe the professor wants us to do it live.
Okay. Professor, can
Correct
you?
me if I'm wrong though, anybody, I'm not sure. All my classes are all like mixed up. I can't.
That's totally understandable. I know it can be really hard to keep track of what's what these days, especially when it's all kind of contained in one single screen. Professor, can you help us out here and let us know how the presentations are given in this class?
Preferably, it's going to be live. So that's my ideal goal, unless the students have specific circumstances that prevent them from making a live session with us. And, recommendation being on videos as much as possible to have eye contact with us. And I know we can't force this at CUNY, but this doesn't mean we should be off all times. Okay, so I really would like them to consider doing live sessions on presentations, which we did last year. It went great. We also did our Globus presentations, not only our company research reports. So it went really well. So that will be our preference.
Okay, great. Thank you for that information. So there's going to be a lot of aspects that are similar to doing a face-to-face presentation as doing a live presentation over Zoom, but there are also going to be ways in which things are a little bit different. So let's just brainstorm together what kinds of things on the list that we've identified here, what's still relevant and what's maybe a lot less relevant or completely irrelevant when it comes to doing a presentation on Zoom.
I think body language will be slightly less relevant, but also I think it could be useful if we do have our cameras on, but also having some sort of graph or information like visible on the screen, I think will be really helpful.
Yeah, so one thing to think about when it comes to Zoom versus a face-to-face presentation, even if you have a camera on, people see less of your body, right? Typically, I mean, you can look at my screen right now, it's like chest up. You're not seeing me stand up, you're not seeing me walk around. And so there's less body language to think about. Even if you see people at all, there's still, it's a smaller window, right? Your video, particularly, I'm imagining the context where you're screen sharing a slide deck. That slide deck pretty much takes up the majority of the screen, right? So your picture and your body language, while it still is important, it's far less of a piece of the presentation than a face-to-face presentation, than in a face-to-face presentation. That said, what becomes a lot more important is your slide deck, right? That's going to be the main visual eye candy that your audience has to engage with. So what else becomes less important or more important, or just things we need to think about here?
Timing is relevant.
Timing.
And the clarity of your content.
Yeah, so we have timing, clear content. I'll add to this clear speech. So your timing is still important. You want to make sure that you're within the time limit. I'd say that it's perhaps even a little bit more important over Zoom, not just because we all have Zoom fatigue and so we want things not to stretch out too long, but also because when you're working with a group, which we'll also talk about in just a moment, there's kind of more things to figure out online, right? If you are doing a group presentation, all your group members have to know when they're going, what they're saying, who's going next, so that the technological aspect of the whole thing is much more seamless. Making sure your content is clear, your central message is clear, all of that is still super important, super relevant. And while your body language is probably less of a factor over Zoom, what becomes much more relevant is your voice, right? That's the thing that everyone hears during the presentation. So even if they're not looking at you, they're listening to you. And that includes even if you do a pre-recorded voiceover. Your voice becomes much more important. So speaking clearly, speaking slowly enough. We all have a tendency to speed up, especially when we're nervous. So you might think that you're speaking very slowly. Chances are you're not speaking too slowly. So always think about slowing down when you're speaking. What else becomes important in an online context?
Now that we present at home, it's important to be aware of your background, that there's no one is running, no one is talking.
Yeah, so I just want to add a caveat to that. In an absolutely ideal world, we all have these wonderful studio office spaces where no one else is around and they're very brightly lit, and we don't have distracting backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. And if you have that available to you, that's incredible. The better you can get your surroundings, the better off you are. That said, I think there's also an awareness right now that we're all kind of stuck with the spaces that we have. And so make the best of the situation that you have, but also recognize that we're going to be a little bit forgiving. I mean, I'm sitting in my bedroom right now. That's not going to stop me from turning on my video. So don't let certain things, like maybe not having a super fancy green screen background, keep you from being on video for your presentation. But a general awareness of your surroundings, always helpful. Control what you can control. What about, and just as I said that, my kitten is yelling at me outside my bedroom door. So that's kind of life, right? What about working in a group? So what additional considerations do we have for the fact that we're in a group versus doing a solo presentation.
Transitions.
Yeah, transitions become super huge. Transitions from person to person, understanding how the different pieces fit together, but also from a technological perspective. In person, you might have, one slideshow that's being projected and a remote that you can pass to the next person who's coming after you. On Zoom, I would not recommend 5 different people attempting to screen share one after another. It becomes really clunky and hard to do. So understanding who's going when, practicing with your group mates and figuring out who's going to be in charge of the slide deck and clicking from slide to slide and making a plan for how you're going to signal to the person in charge of clicking through the slides when you need the next slide. So transitions between person to person and understanding how everything fits together, super important. What else is important when it comes to a group presentation context?
I would say timing.
Okay.
I think that comes with practice. If you practice your presentation, then all group members kind of know where they should stop or not go over time, so everyone gets a chance to speak.
Yeah, you want to make sure that you've practiced your own part, but also practiced as a group, because you don't want the first 3 members to take up all the time and then suddenly, say the last member, if this were a 4-person group, not have time to deliver their part. So understanding how long your part is, but also understanding what it's like to work together, because it always takes longer together than it does individually. What about the slide deck itself? What kinds of considerations do we need to give to the slides when working in a group?
I think trying not to put too much content on the slides, like try not to put word for word what you're gonna say, because like you said, like what you say is more important and like it's gonna be more heard and more like relevant to what's being said. So not too much content on the slides.
Okay. I would definitely say the only caveat I'm going to give to that is that I would say make sure your slides are clean and digestible. I think it's a little bit different from not too much content, just in that when you get out into the corporate world, there's going to be different standards for different corporations about how much information and content they like on a slide. And that's just part of like corporate culture and the standards that are set by that corporation. And sometimes there are slides that have a ton, a ton of information on them, and that's the expectation. But there are also, certain places that like the slides to be very minimal. So it's just going to depend upon the particular context you're working in. I don't know if your professor has a preference for how much information is contained on one slide, or how do you like slides to look, Professor?
Okay, the slides, usually I say it towards the end of the course, but that's good that we can think about it right now also, start thinking about it. Usually no more than 5 to 6 bullet points. So the less is better. I usually encourage them to use visuals more than sentences. So they could even like give a summary of a summary or even a keyword, and they can provide graphs, figures, more than like sentences or paragraphs. I don't encourage them to use, let's say, paragraphs or compositions that are long prose. So that's the requirement for the PPTs. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So yes, in this case, not too much content in the form of words or paragraphs or long sentences is preferred. However, you can have a lot of content contained in a graph. So graphs themselves tend to have a lot of information contained with them. That's the beauty of a graph, is that it's nice and simple and clean feeling while conveying a lot of information. So I'm just going to add not too many words here, but definitely anytime you can add a graph or a chart of some kind, some sort of visual information, the better. What about kind of like the overall structure of the slides or overall formatting? What kinds of things do we need to think about when working as a group?
That our parts are cohesive and flow into each other and don't look maybe like 4 different people did one presentation.
Yeah, exactly. We want to look like we have a cohesive presentation that's been put together by one unified team and not by 4 or 5 different individuals. So what this generally means is that you want to have all the same color scheme and theme and background and font and size, and even the way that you display your bullet points should be the same, which means that if one person's using bullets, the other person, you don't want them to use a dashes for a list versus someone else using numbers, right? So make sure that you've put one cohesive theme on this. My biggest recommendation is that when you're making your slides, don't add your theme or colors or anything until the end when you've put all of your slides together. So you can all write out your slides in just very boring, like black and white, and then combine your slides together and you can apply whatever themes or styles you want at that point so that you know that everybody is using the same thing. Again, when you get out into the corporate world, there's a good chance that all of this is going to be determined for you. Many companies have a slide theme that they have and style guidelines that they have all their employees use. So this is likely not something that you need to think about in your job moving forward, but right now, when you're pretending to be like one group from one company, you need to think about what that theme and that style is going to be. Anything else that you feel like is important in a group context that we haven't covered? Okay, I think that pretty much covers it. So now that we understand and are thinking actively about what makes for a really good presentation, we're going to get a chance to practice these skills. So what I'm going to give to you right now, I'm going to put a link in the chat to some Google Docs. And I'm going to ask you to take a look at handouts 1 and 2. Now, there's a good chance you might already have these handouts. I believe your professor has either emailed them to you or posted them on Blackboard. But if you haven't, okay, but if you haven't downloaded them from Blackboard, like I said, down in the chat, there is a link there where you can download them from Google Docs. So go ahead and download those handouts. And I'm going to ask you to start by reading handout number 1, which is a case study about Mark Yang. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to do this. And then I'm also going to ask you to start using handout 2 and answering the questions on there. It's going to get you thinking about the case. And then in a few minutes, we're going to go into breakout rooms with your teammates. But so take the next 10 minutes to read handout 1 and start taking notes on handout 2, and then we'll come back together.
So should we be forming the groups now, or?
Yes, so I was going to say that if you want to make me the host, I can form them, or if you would like to form them.
So I will. I want I want my students to go into a team. Like they will see the member, so they will join that members team. Okay, we have 7 teams. Remember, so you will choose your rooms. Let's say Mariah chooses room 1. Those are on team of Mariah's will join room 1. Is that clear, guys? And once you choose the room, it doesn't mean I open them yet. When